Throughout this weekend celebration of the John Birch Society's 25 years of existence, we will be paying tribute to many of the accomplishments of our members. We've done some of that already this morning. In these tributes, there will be many examples of the leadership of Robert Welch, Larry McDonald, and others. As the Director of Field Activities, I've been asked to talk to you today about the leadership of the John Birch Society that I'm most familiar with, the volunteer leaders, the field staff, and of course the President of the John Birch Society, Thomas N. Hill. But who could possibly talk about the John Birch Society or leadership without a quote or two from the Master? In the December 1968 bulletin, Robert Welch wrote the following: "We are not indulging in any idle dream. Too much is at stake. And remember this, these conspirators, despite their present power, still constitute less than 3% of our total population. All the basic interests of 97% of all Americans are on our side. The criminal megalomaniacs who seek to enslave us are counting on cowardice, ignorance, inertia, and opportunism among our people to enable them to do so. But these ignoble human traits can be overcome by leadership, which provides the worthy example, and labor, which creates sufficient understanding. And there, my wonderful friends, lies the great role, responsibility, and purpose of the John Birch Society during the unbelievable critical years immediately ahead." Mr. Welch was writing about personal leadership, just as he did in the Blue Book when he wrote, "Personal leadership holds together a following in the way that organizational leadership never can." He went on to say that if an organization is going to be successful, the members of that group must declare an allegiance to, come to feel an unshakable loyalty for, and thus accept direction from a personal dynamic leader. What is not only needed, he continued, but is absolutely imperative, is for some hard-boiled, dictatorial, and dynamic boss to come along and deliver himself. And deliver himself he did. We would not be here today celebrating the 25th anniversary of the John Birch Society if Mr. Welch had not understood the importance of personal dynamic leadership at all levels. Mr. Welch also understood the necessity of loyalty. In a footnote to the 18th printing of the Blue Book, he said, "Personal loyalty is the cement that holds the John Birch Society together, while other groups crumble around us. Without it, the John Birch Society would already have broken up on any one of a half a dozen rocks in our course. It is the cohesive force that reaches across passing doubts and disagreements, welding temporary doubters and enthusiasts alike into one permanent body of men and women unshakably dedicated to the society and its basic purposes. The key is leadership. In fact, Vince Lombardi said, 'Leaders are made, they are not born, and they are made just like anything else that has ever been made in this country, by hard effort.' And that's the price that we all have to pay to achieve that goal or any goal. It is becoming increasingly difficult to be tolerant," he continued, "of a society that has sympathy only for the misfits, only for the maladjusted, only for the criminal, only for the loser. Have sympathy for them, help them, but I think it's about time all of us, to stand up for and to cheer for the doer, the achiever, one who recognizes a problem and does something about it, one who looks at something extra to do for his country, the winner, the leader." In the John Birch Society, all of us are leaders. And today I would like to pay tribute to the chapter leaders, the section leaders, the coordinators, the major coordinators, and I'd also like to pave the way for the rest of you to become leaders. Larry McDonald wrote in the foreword to the September 1983 bulletin that the John Birch Society has the formula and is supplying the tools. This is the time for members and staff to fill the role in history that stands as a challenge before us. He asks us not to expect our coordinators to do our work for us, but to assume leadership in the John Birch Society wherever and whenever we could. We are looking for people sufficiently motivated to want to do something, to lead others to a better understanding of the problems we face, and their solutions. Remember that in the land of the blind, the one-eyed is king. The God that has the answers leads those that doesn't. Since you and I have the answers, like it or not, we must be the leaders in our communities. Very few of us assume that we have the qualities of leadership, but frequently we find ourselves in a position of being one. The most thankless job in the John Birch Society is that of the chapter leader. He or she is the key to our success. Somebody has to hold the pole, to be around for the local members to gravitate to. Somebody has to send out the meeting notices, telephone and remind the members of the meetings, host the meetings, conduct the meetings, collect the dues, the MMMs, assign the tasks, answer the questions, listen to the complaints, separate the various factions, plan the petitions, organize the rummage sales, give the new member orientations, and ensure the coordinator gets a home-cooked meal. Some of us stress that emphatically. This is a tremendous responsibility, for without it, all the rest of the organization is not going to get the job done. How many groups are around that only have a national representative? They don't build anything. They don't have continuing active neighborhood leadership. Their staff is here today and gone tomorrow. Our local leaders give us a continuity, and our hat is off to those people because they're the ones that do get the job done. You may not want the job, you may feel that you're too busy for the job, but we hear to that old adage, if you have an important job, give it to the busiest person in town. They know how to get the job done. They fit their new responsibilities into their activities. They understand the importance of doing so. The most recent example that I can think of that demonstrates the importance of the chapter leader is the attack this summer by the ACLU on the Los Angeles Police Department. The ACLU, with some help from the Black Panthers and the Revolutionary Communist Party, tried to railroad a Freedom of Information Act through the Los Angeles City Council. Our Los Angeles coordinator alerted approximately 20 chapter leaders. These chapter leaders immediately went to work on a massive educational campaign attacking the ACLU, exposing the dangers of the Freedom of Information Act, and promoting our local police. Over 100 members took the day off from work twice to attend these all-day city council meetings. The council was intimidated in the first meeting by the show of strength for the police department and decided it was safer to delay the vote for 5 weeks in hopes that our members would give up or forget the battle. They didn't understand the John Birch Society. During that 5-week period, our members, under the direction of their chapter leaders, raised $5,000 and distributed 13 different reprints to key opinion molders throughout the Los Angeles area. They distributed a total of over 10,000 reprints. They attended the next city council meeting in full force, and the city council members were forced to add amendments to the Freedom of Information Act until, in the words of the chief of the police of the Los Angeles Police Department, Daryl Gates, that the police ended up with 80% of what they wanted. Chief Gates thanked the John Birch Society for taking the teeth of this disastrous act. How far would we have gotten if there were not chapter leaders in Los Angeles? Obviously, there wasn't sufficient time to organize or train local leaders to do the job that our members knew had to be done. Time and again, the volunteer leaders of the John Birch Society across the United States were and are able to assemble the troops to defeat various left-wing schemes. No other organization could win these battles because there isn't another organization that has the amount of, nor the caliber of, our volunteer leaders. Our chapter leaders have to put forth a lot of effort, and the return is commensurate with the amount of that effort. I can't overemphasize the importance of the chapter leader. He is our man in Havana. All things flow to and from the chapter leaders. Without the chapter leaders, we would be just another conservative organization with a few pamphlets and a computerized mailing list. The chapter leader is the backbone of the John Birch Society. In fact, we are making that position more and more important as we go along. Larry McDonald spelled it out in the September bulletin. Tom Hill is now sending sporadic interim bulletins to our chapter leaders. We are now setting the action requests in the bulletin in bold type. Those are the items that we expect our chapter leaders to dwell on to guide our members toward the action programs. Section leaders. Originally, section leaders were not part of the plans laid out in the Blue Book. This position was developed by Mr. Welch when Mr. Welch saw the need for volunteer coordinators to supervise the appointment of chapter leaders and ensure that chapters were functioning in their communities. This position enables the paid staff to develop other areas to relieve them of the responsibility of continual supervision over a group of chapters. The section leader is still a key position today. Usually this type of individual is someone of prominence in the community or someone with a deeper understanding of what we are trying to do, and is part of the linkage, the most important part of the linkage, between the home office in Belmont to the field staff to the chapter leader. Remember when Larry McDonald wanted us to write to President Carter in a last-ditch effort to save President Somoza? Larry had asked the heads of several conservative organizations to do the same, but each one of them told Larry that it would take several weeks for them to generate a massive letter-writing campaign to President Carter. Because of our structure, section leaders, chapter leaders to members, we were able to generate over 25,000 letters and telegrams within a period of 72 hours. Without the section leaders, our coordinators would have had to call each of the chapter leaders instead of a handful of section leaders. That extra effort on our coordinators' part would have resulted in fewer letters and telegrams being sent in a longer period of time. Our coordinators, their responsibilities were outlined in the July 1965 bulletin by Robert Welch. At that time, they were very simple. Number 1, recruit new members and form new chapters. Number 2, supervise organizationally the chapter membership. And number 3, help members implement agenda items or local projects approved by the Home Office. Although these areas are still the coordinator's basic responsibilities, we have added innumerable tasks. Some of the specific duties of our coordinators today are: set up and oversee and often conduct film series and presentations, to follow up on the attendees to those, affect the placement of new members, conduct personal recruiting calls, to appoint and train section leaders and chapter leaders, to establish information and action programs, handle the overall promotion of JBS local affairs, appoint and train committee chairman, appoint and train speakers chairman, appoint and train leaders, and supervise other specific ad hoc efforts such as support your local police, motor aid and train committees, supervise membership and projects such as UN Day, aid and trade petitioning, the review of the news and American opinion promotions, distribution of article reprints, raise outright contributions to the John Birch Society, sell magazine advertising, help to establish American opinion bookstores, bring about exposure and sale of society published books and other literature, sell bulk subscription programs for the magazines, promote youth camps, initiate local projects once approved, raise money for school support, establish and maintain business chapters, and carry out the different assignments usually given by the Home Office in relation to arranging local travel for speakers, writers, researchers, etc. Handling with the approval and direction of public relations appearances on TV, radio, and interviews with the press. And also eat those good home-cooked meals. These fellows are executives. Each one is tantamount to a regional vice president or a regional sales manager in a commercial operation. Whenever we hire a man who thinks he knows what the responsibilities of a coordinator are, he has another thing coming. Because until he really gets in and does the job, he can't comprehend the scope of these responsibilities. I'm sure that every coordinator that is sitting here in this room today never realized 75% of the duties of the coordinator, in spite of how long he'd been a member or how many volunteer positions he might have held. The job primarily was to go out and recruit members and organize chapters and implement educational programs according to the guidelines set by our Home Office. The responsibilities sure have changed. In the early 60s, we never contemplated making advertising salesmen out of our coordinators, but we were forced to do that kind of thing just to stay alive and to get the revenue we needed to grow. We never contemplated we would have operations such as our trim committees that would demand an almost parallel structure to the society under the supervision of the coordinator. We never contemplated the youth camps and the varied responsibilities our coordinators had to assume to make them the great success they are today. Our coordinators have become much more aggressive in the past few years. There was a time when most businessmen felt it was unwise to join the John Birch Society. Slowly they began to realize that they had better use some of their business assets to save the rest. Today, financial help for the John Birch Society from these businessmen is not enough. Recently, our Santa Barbara coordinator accepted the membership application from a substantial businessman who had just heard Chuck Armour's Behind the Headlines seminar. As our coordinator congratulated this man on his wise decision to join the John Birch Society, He said, "Mr. Smith, a lot of businessmen think they are doing their part by donating to the John Birch Society, but we will not win this battle with money alone. So I am going to require a lot of your time." More and more our members are beginning to realize that they must periodically set aside time from their business to go out with our coordinators to their associates, to cultivate them and to ask them for their support. The major coordinators have always been Mr. Welch's men in the field. When something happened in one part of the country that attracted the attention, good or bad, of Mr. Welch, he would always refer to the area as Major Coordinator so-and-so's territory. This is the fundamental leadership position in the field. Of all the men in the field, the Major Coordinator is the individual under the most scrutiny by those supervising every facet of our operation. If we are not selling enough subscriptions to our magazines in a particular area, it is the Major Coordinator who is consulted. If our nonpartisan educational activities in Florida result in a political success, it is the Major Coordinator that we look to for an analysis of that situation. He is the guy whose judgment we rely on to find, hire, and at sometimes fire coordinators. He is kind of the executive vice president of the operation in the field. He makes a lot of judgment decisions in the course of his day-to-day activities. These judgment decisions are based on the principles and practices and purposes of the John Birch Society. He does not make policy, but he interprets policy daily and applies those principles to given situations. And then, of course, he has to live with it. The selection of our major coordinators has been based primarily on his good judgment. Our major coordinators today are also advertising and sales representatives for the Review of the News and the American Opinion magazines. If we had not added these additional responsibilities to these men, our magazines would not be getting the financial support they need to expand the circulation and scope. Again, the key is leadership. And speaking of our top leader today, Thomas N. Hill, president of the John Birch Society, he has been on the staff for 24.5 years, since the Society was 6 months old. Although many of the qualities of Robert Welch were embedded in Tom Hill, he certainly is his own man. Those of us on the staff know this to be true, and Mr. Welch readily admits that many times when they have had sharp disagreements over fundamental issues, that Tom's good judgment usually prevailed. Mr. Welch said that he had never met a man of Tom's age with better judgment, and that good judgment is a fundamental quality of leadership. So we're paying a tribute here today to the leadership, ladies and gentlemen, leadership at every level. Without the local chapter leader, we would be nothing, or at best only another mailing list. Without the section leader, we couldn't expand. Without the coordinator, we could not have continuity and stability and development. And without the major coordinator, we would lack the fundamental ingredient of judgment, of supervision, of the selection of the right people to represent officially the John Birch Society. For those of you who are our leaders in the John Birch Society, we want to thank you for your tireless efforts. For those of you who were leaders or who are potential leaders, now is the time for you to act. Volunteer to be a chapter leader, a section leader, a trim chairman. By all means, if there isn't a Larry McDonald crusade to stop financing communism in your town, contact your coordinator and ask him if you can start one. I would like to close with another quotation from Robert Welch. In the Blue Book, he said, "The biggest of all our organizational mistakes is to set up a local group for some continuing purpose, exhort them to do a good job, and then leave them alone to do it. It is the leadership that is most demanding, most exacting of its followers, not the one which asks the least and is afraid to ask more, that achieves really dedicated support. We are presupposing here an initial faith and dedication which should be constantly strengthened by a man's straining efforts to live up to what is expected of him and to live up to the promise he has made to himself." The faithful members and leaders of the John Birch Society have lived up to what is expected of them for the past 25 years. We are immensely proud of them and their accomplishments. On behalf of the staff of the John Birch Society, we want to thank each and every one of you for all of the time, influence, and money that you have put into this movement throughout these long, hard years. We are looking forward to working with each of you during the next 25 years. Thank you very much.